Okay, folks, we're about to get started.
Oh.
So please find your seats.
That's why they put up. Maybe I can get a chair over here.
I wondered.
All right. In the middle. Okay. I don't want to get everybody, anybody.
Anybody else need a chair? We have one more chair.
Put it back there. Okay, so let's get started. And welcome to the launch of We Set the Night on Fire, Igniting the Gay Revolution by Martha Shelley. Please give her a warm welcome. And Martha will be joined after she reads from the book by several members of the Gay Liberation Front. So we're very excited to have you all here today. Welcome also to the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the space you find yourselves in right now. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau. And we are being helped today by Tannen Reckling, one of our volunteers. So the Bureau is an all-volunteer queer bookstore. We're open Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And we often stay open later when we have events. So thanks for coming out today. We do have a suggested donation of $10, but as we say, give what you can, if you can. And if you'd rather support us by buying books, that is a wonderful way to do that. So I'll pass this around. There's change in the bag if you need it. You can also, you can also make a donation on Venmo at EGSQD. So the letters all around you. And welcome to our viewers online as well. So Mark Siegel is going to introduce Shelley, but I want you to briefly, there it is. Throw some paper around. I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. And with that, I turn it over to one of the founders of the Gay Liberation Front, Mark Siegel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Come on, ladies, let's go. It's afternoon. Okay, so you're wondering why I'm here. First off, I come to you from the People's Republic of Philadelphia, but I lived in New York during an interesting hay time, 1969 to 1971. And during that period, I happened to meet a few interesting people that you're going to be seeing later on after Martha gets done speaking. But why should I be the one to have this incredible honor, this privilege of introducing our sister? Well, because I'm the only one here that could probably say exactly when they met Martha. And it's amazing. So there are great archives around the city, and many of which most of us have not looked at, that literally talk about our history. And we among ourselves often talk about how our history is being revised. And so we've gotten together, of course, to try to finally relive that history and tell you our history the way we created it. So one of the things that was very interesting is after the raid on the Stonewall, many people got together and started talking, what can we do? We united as a community. And the first demonstration that ever took place was July 27th, 1969. And that demonstration literally is considered the founding of Gay Liberation Front. And the two people who have found that march itself were Marty Robinson and Martha Shelley. Now, as you might know, those of us in Gay Liberation Front were a contentious group. So I have a picture from that very first march. And it's a very famous photo, and you might not realize what's going on in the background, but as I explain this, you will see it because those of you who live GLF will know it. Many of you have seen this picture, right? Everybody knows that's Marty. But if you look very closely, having an argument, trying to decide what's going on, is a very young Mark Sigel and Martha Shelley. And that is the first time that we met. We've now had a friendship for 54 years. And what I can tell you from my knowledge, you are about ready to hear from a legend. Wow. My friends, here it is, Martha Shelley.
Thank you all. Okay, thank you all, and thank you for agreeing to wear masks, but you're not on. The reason particularly is that my wife has a congenital heart condition. Nothing she did wrong, but bad genes. This is a woman who never smoked, drank, did drugs, always took care of herself, exercised. But because of this heart condition, the doctor said if she gets COVID, which means if I get it and bring it home to her, she will die. And so thank you for your consideration in doing this. And with that, I will read some stuff from the memoir. This first piece is how I got involved in the gay movement. And that was before Stonewall, before Gay Liberation Front. In November 1967, when I was 23, I found my way to a Daughters of Believers meeting. The DOB rented a suite in an office building, inexpensive, but in a reasonably safe area, with nondescript furniture and no decorations on the walls. Like the bars, we kept a low profile. Our DOB chapter had monthly business meetings, during which we folded and addressed the newsletter. It included a calendar of events, a dance, a lecture by a psychologist, telling us why we gays weren't crazy, or an evening with a middle-aged lesbian couple who lived in suburban New Jersey and would give us tips on how to make our relationships work. There were about 200 women on the mailing list, though only a handful showed up for events. Jean Powers and Eleanor Kravitz, a couple who ran the New York chapter, were in their early 40s. Jean always attended meetings, but Eleanor rarely came to the office. I never got to know her particularly well. She worked as a bookkeeper and was disabled from having survived polio. Jean was from Oklahoma. She'd been forced out of the Defense Department, suspected of being gay, and in any case was too big, too smart, and too well organized. Qualities that would have gotten a man promoted to manager, but that men found threatening in a woman. She used her managerial skills to keep the chapter running, and during the day she had some kind of computer job. Despite our differences, she was a Republican and I was far to the left of Democrat. We seemed to like each other. Jean and Eleanor saw that they could make use of my youth and enthusiasm and asked me to run for treasurer. I was honored until I realized that nobody else wanted the job. I reported income and expenditures in a black composition notebook during the times when I borrowed 15 cents for car fare, that's what it cost in those days, and reimbursed the treasury when I got my paycheck. After 2 months, Eleanor reviewed my work. These are the screwiest books I've ever seen, she said. It took me a week to make head or tail out of them. But I'll give you this, you didn't steal a penny. Nobody ever taught me how to keep books, I replied. Eleanor took the job back. She and Jean then tried me out as chapter president. That didn't work well either. I had no idea what the duties were, and they hadn't given me a to-do list. Finally, since I was a frequent and articulate participant in our group discussions, they asked me to be the public speaker. Perhaps because McCarthyism had been discredited, perhaps because I hadn't invested years in a career that could be destroyed if I were known to be gay, perhaps because I was young and still thought I was immortal, I said yes. In September 1968, I started a new job at Barnard College. My boss was Jean T. Palmer, the general secretary of the college. That meant she saw everything non-academic, including fundraising and admissions. I would be her secretary. I saw her as a nice lady from the Midwest, probably upper middle class, warm and well-mannered. She was short like me, but with white hair and sparkling blue eyes. Something happened to this hair. One evening in the spring of 1969, I think it was February, I spoke for DOB in an interview with a reporter for WOR Radio. It would be part of his show on the sexual revolution and was to be aired the following day. Next morning, I was sitting at my desk when Miss Palmer sailed in. Guess what, she said, WOR Radio was here last night interviewing girls from the new co-ed dormitory, and I must stay up tonight and tune in. In a panic, I told Jean Powers, what am I going to do? The boss is going to hear my voice on that program. Just call the radio station and explain, Jean replied calmly. They'll understand, and they'll take that segment off the air. I couldn't do it. Maybe it was the poster of Martin Luther King that I had hung over my desk. Maybe it was the question I'd always asked myself. What would you do if you'd been a German under the Nazi regime? Would you have been too cowardly to stand up for the persecuted or brave enough to resist? During the rest of the workday, I was so obviously agitated that my coworkers wondered aloud what was wrong with me, though they didn't ask directly. At 5, just as the boss was about to leave, I gathered my courage. Miss Palmer, I said, I'm going to be on that WOR radio program. What for? I'm representing the Daughters of Velitas. What's that? A civil rights organization for lesbians. Miss Palmer gave me a big wink. Nice that you young people are involved in so many causes. Now help me out with my coat here. I'm going to be late for the opera. I should say that Miss Palmer had been the head of the Women's Navy during World War II. And she was living with the woman who was the head of Catherine Gibbs' secretarial school, helping women get job skills so they didn't have to be dependent on men. And at that time, the new president of Barnard College was one of us. And the woman who had been the first president of Barnard College, back when it was founded, was one of us as well. Okay, so that was February. Then came June. Jean Powers phoned me during the last week of June. 2 women were visiting from Boston and wanted to start a DOB chapter there. They were staying at Jean's apartment. Would I be willing to give them a tour of Greenwich Village on Saturday night? Of course, I said. I called Allison, my lover at the time, and told her I'd come to her place after escorting the Boston ladies around town. Saturday, June 28th, 1969, was a typically hot summer day in the city. It had reached 92 degrees at midday, and even after dinner, when I picked up the visitors, the temperature still hovered around 90. I don't remember any of the watering holes or landmarks we visited, except one. We were walking along Christopher Street when we came upon a group of young men throwing things at cops. The Boston women were startled. "What's going on?" one of them exclaimed. "It's just a riot," I replied, assuming that we had encountered yet another anti-war demonstration. We have them all the time. I mean, I have been in many of those. Since I didn't patronize gay men's bars, I wasn't aware that we were passing the Stonewall Inn, or that such a place even existed. As we subsequently learned, the rioters were young gay men and one butch lesbian responding to a police raid. Some of them were drag queens, and as far as I know, none of them called themselves transsexuals in those days, instead using the term transvestites. Although a few may have adopted that term or even transitioned in later years. The Stonewall, like similar establishments, was mafia-owned and paid protection money to the police department. But this was an election year. Mayor Lindsay was running again, and the cops had been ordered to clean up the city. That meant rounding up the prostitutes in Times Square and raiding the gay bars. Usually the gays made no resistance, instead covering their faces as they were herded into paddy wagons. This time was different. The gays threw things at cops, even locking some of them into the bar and trying, unsuccessfully, to set the place on fire. Rioting went on for several nights. I had no idea that Saturday night that we were witnessing an event of enormous significance. We turned aside to avoid the fray. I led my Boston charges to the nearest subway entrance and delivered them to Jean and Eleanor's place. From there, I took the subway north to the 181st Street station, expecting to catch the bus to Englewood, New Jersey, where Ellison lived. But it was around 3 a.m. and the buses had stopped running. I decided to walk across the George Washington Bridge. It was very quiet and still hot. The full moon, like a brass shield, hung in a pitch black sky. As you all know, you can't see stars in New York City. Somewhat to the southwest and directly over the equally pitch black Hudson River, a silent, immense python slithering toward the sea. Monday, another hot, sticky summer day, found me lazing around, trying to recover from a weekend of too little sleep, when I saw the story in the New York Times. Heavy police reinforcements cleared the Sheridan Square area of Greenwich Village again yesterday morning when crowds of young men, angered by a police raid on an inn frequented by homosexuals, swept through the area. I jumped up immediately, on fire, thinking, this is our moment, and phoned Jean Powers. We got to have a protest march. Why don't you call Mattachine? She replied. If the guys want to do it, we can jointly sponsor a march. It was clear that she herself would not be showing up at a march. After hanging up from the conversation with Jean, I called Dick Leitch, head of the Mattachine Society. He didn't seem particularly enthusiastic. He did tell me that his organization was having a meeting at a public auditorium downtown and said I could attend and make my proposal. When I arrived, the hall was packed, 400 gay guys, one female Mattachine member, and me. I found myself sitting next to a 40-ish guy named Bob Kohler. He spoke passionately about young gays in the streets, some still in their teens, thrown out by their parents for being homosexual. Having no job skills, they earned their living by prostitution and desperately needed help. When it was my turn to speak and I suggested a protest march, Leitch asked how many people were in favor of it. A forest of hands went up. I think that surprised him because he was used to being the only public spokesman for gay guys in the city. Everyone else was deep in the closet. At the end of the meeting, he said, those who want to organize a march should meet over in that corner. We formed a committee on the spot and agreed to meet the following Saturday at the Madison offices. I'm fairly sure I was the only woman present. There were 8 guys or so, including Bob Kohler and another man, Marty Robinson. It was a hot afternoon, and we were drinking cold beers and in high spirits, actually a little tipsy. At one point, someone uttered the words, Gay Liberation Front. I whacked the table a couple of times and hollered, that's it, we're the Gay Liberation Front. Then I noticed blood running down my palm. I had been slamming my hand against a pop top from a beer can, but with the beer and the excitement, I was feeling no pain. Well, we have a little water. And the next section is about some of what Gay Liberation Front did and why we were different from the previous organizations. During the McCarthy era, the late 1940s through 1950s, it was truly dangerous to be gay. We were imprisoned, arrested, beaten, fired from our jobs, and subjected to electroshock therapy. We were systematically hunted out of federal employment and military service. During this period, notorious for persecution of anyone tainted with the slightest suspicion of communist connection, more suspected gays were expelled from the government than suspected communists. Only a handful of gay men and lesbians were willing to be out in those early days. Those brave individuals founded the Mattachine Society for Gay Men in Los Angeles in 1950, and the lesbian organization, the Daughters of Bilitis, in San Francisco in 1955. Those groups and others that arrived a bit later worked hard to present us as respectable citizens and plead politely for acceptance into mainstream America. The Gay Liberation Front broke with its forebears in 2 ways. First, we didn't give a rat's ass about being respectable. We didn't want to move up in a system of hierarchical cruelties. We wanted to overturn it. Yes. Second, we made common cause with others fighting the same system. Like many GLF members, I participated in a wide range of social justice actions. In September 1969, I was part of the second feminist demonstration against the Miss America pageant. The first demonstration, held the previous year, had disrupted the pageant, at least briefly, by unfurling a women's liberation banner. The second was a flop. 2 women had purchased tickets to the show. I don't know what they'd planned to do if they'd succeeded in entering the convention center, but they had come up with the absurd plan to disguise themselves as nuns using homemade costumes. Why would nuns want to attend a beauty contest? A large Irish security guard stopped them at the door and turned them away. He seemed amused. In October 1969, according to the New York Times, over 500,000 people protested in Washington, D.C. in the moratorium to end the war in Vietnam. Smaller demonstrations took place all around the United States. In New York City, one arm of the protest marched across the Brooklyn Bridge to a rally on Wall Street. A GLF contingent was part of another gathering of 40,000 in Bryant Park, in the heart of Midtown Manhattan. In my mind's eye, I can still see our little band holding a banner aloft. In April of that year, 21 members of the Black Panther Party had been arrested, with bail set at $100,000 apiece. For the next 10 months, the Panthers were held in solitary confinement. Lights were kept on 24 hours a day. The prisoners were denied reading materials, recreational facilities, and visits from family members. Some of them weren't even given mattresses. The two women were limited to 4 sheets of toilet paper per day. New left groups, churches, and rich and famous individuals like Leonard Bernstein worked to raise the $2.1 million in bail money. In November, after much heated debate, GLF agreed to donate $500 to the fund. I was on the losing side. I thought we were such a small organization with so little in our piggy bank that we should keep the money for our own needs. Also, at that time, the Panthers were distinctly homophobic, slamming their enemies as faggots. In retrospect, I was wrong. The next year, when GLF members confronted the Panthers at their convention, they changed their policies regarding gays. On December 4th, 1969, the Chicago police murdered 2 Panthers, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, shooting over 90 times into the apartment where the men slept. When I heard the news, I was terrified. They could do that to any of us, I thought. Afraid to stay alone, I spent the next night at the apartment of GLFers Lois Hart and Suzanne Bevier. Their presence comforted me. On December 7th, 13 representatives of the Young Lords, a Puerto Rican liberation group, went to the First Spanish Methodist Church in East Harlem to request space for a children's breakfast program. The minister called the police, who beat the 13 and arrested them on charges of inciting to riot. On December 28th, the Young Lords entered the church and occupied it for the next 10 days. They used the premises for that breakfast program, for a free clinic staffed by a sympathetic doctor and medical students, for classes, film showings, and a New Year's Mass by a radical priest. As a representative of GLF, I visited the church and the Young Lords office a couple of times. They were aware of the Stonewall riots and were already in support. John, another GLFer, was working with the Young Lords, as were 2 women's liberation activists and a representative of the United Farm Workers. During Christmas week, GLF held a vigil outside the Women's House of Detention for the 2 women imprisoned as part of the Panther Group, Joan Bird and Angela Davis. I had a late night shift and it was very cold. Just as I was about to leave, a couple who lived in the area invited some of us to their townhouse to warm up. They were obviously wealthy liberals with leftist posters on their walls. They fed us things we could never afford to buy. The wheel of brie on their table must have been 1.5 feet in diameter. The trial of the Panther 21 took 8 months. In May 1971, after what had been the longest and costliest trial in New York history, the defendants were acquitted of all charges. The taxpayer footed the bill, and the cops and the FBI continued to target the Panthers. Okay, so I'm going to read a section about me being rather badly behaved. Okay, this was moving ahead somewhat. I've got tickets to the Ms. Magazine party tomorrow night, but I'm not going, Phyllis told me. They're yours if you want them. I did. It was July 1973 and the first anniversary of Ms. Magazine. They had rented a Circle Line boat for the celebration. Phyllis Chesler was a big name in the feminist literary world. Women in Madness had been reviewed on the front page of the New York Times book review section, and she rated a pair of free tickets. My contributions to radical left and lesbian periodicals did not put me in that league, and my friend Connie wasn't a writer at all. However, I was always up for a party where I could meet other writers, while Connie was always up for a party. As you all know, the Circle Line operates a fleet of sightseeing boats that, of course, circle Manhattan. The boats hold up to 500 people. Since the Ms. Magazine affair was scheduled at night, we wouldn't be walking at any sights. Our boat would just cruise up and down the Hudson River for a few hours. An attendant directed us to one of the large oval tables on the upper deck with maybe a dozen people. Much to my delight, an old friend, the playwright Myrna Lamb, was seated on my right, while another feminist, Vivian Bornick, sat next to her. Connie was on my left. I didn't recognize any of the others dining with us. The waiters served the usual rubber chicken dinner with a bland white wine. They kept our glasses full. The one memorable course was the whole pineapple they brought out for dessert. Memorable because the man sitting opposite us shoved it at Connie along with a carving knife. Here, he snapped. You want to be a man? Cut the pineapple like a man. Connie had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Brooklyn. She was big, by the way, with a couple of brothers as large as she was, and had learned how to keep peace without taking shit. She replied mildly and proceeded to slice into the fruit. The man, probably in his early 50s and shorter and smaller than Connie, repeated his remark and elaborated on it. I jumped up and hurled the contents of my glass into his face. The woman next to him, who was obviously his wife, screamed at me and Connie, and perhaps the other feminists as well. You're nothing but a bunch of cunts. Myrna stood up and said, since dinner is over, we should go elsewhere. The four of us walked away. By then, I had realized that the really important guests were the ad men and investors, and the writers were there only for decoration. However, we were stuck on the boat until it returned to the pier, so we might as well enjoy the rest of the party. A section of the upper deck had been set aside as a dance floor, and an all-woman rock band was playing. Connie and I danced until the band took a short break. As soon as the music stopped, another man stepped out of the crowd. He was younger and taller than the guy at the table and had a drink in his hand. He stared down at me, his eyes shooting venom. Why don't you go hang yourself? He snarled. I suppose he picked on me because Connie was even taller than he was, and I seemed like a safe target. Later, I learned that the man had been watching us for 15 minutes, muttering obscenities before he decided to accost me. I stepped forward and shoved him in the chest hard with both hands. He must have been wearing leather-soled shoes. The deck was slippery metal, and there was a metal staircase right behind him. I hadn't noticed it. He went down backwards all the way to the bottom and only saved himself from injury by grabbing the handrail and probably being slap jointed with alcohol. I was simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Relieved that I would not be carried off to jail for assault or even manslaughter, but disappointed that he wasn't lying unconscious in a pool of his own blood. Patricia Carline, the managing editor of Liz, was at my elbow immediately. She began chewing me out. I tried to tell her what he'd said, but she was having none of it. She said if I wanted to fight with people, I should wait until we were off the boat. The next time I saw Phyllis Chesler, she said someone from Ms. had called her. She shouldn't have given her tickets to anyone else, and no one would be allowed to do so in the future. And I, Martha, was banned from future events. I actually didn't mind. The hatred I'd experienced on that boat was hazardous to my health. Too many women were terrified of being labeled man-hating dykes if they spoke up for their rights. We lesbians were expected to suck it up when men insulted us, or our friends or lovers. After that evening, I swore that if I ever found myself at a party where straight men were present, men I didn't know personally, I wouldn't drink, not a drop. Happily, I've kept that vow. Okay, I think, well, we'll leave time for the panel discussion. So I'll stop with that thing here. But I also want to read a poem from this poetry book that I wrote. I have some of them if people want to buy them afterwards. And I don't know how many of you remember this, but a bunch of us women occupied the executive offices of Grove Press in a protest in 1970 and got carted off to jail. And were treated rather badly, but not as badly as we would have been if we weren't white and had media connections. And while I was there, my friend Marion came and tried to bail me out. Fortunately, the judge released me on my own recognizance along with the others, and so she didn't have to take her life savings, which she had brought with her. Marion was my mentor during gay liberation front times. She was older than me. She was about 40, and she had been a member of the Parti Communiste de France in her youth. In fact, she still was a member. She had recently come over from France and had become somewhat disillusioned with the party. But we would meet for lunch where she worked, and she would give me books to read, and we became friends. Back then, I think I met her in 1968, and we stayed friends until she became ill, and my wife and I brought her to Portland and took care of her until her death. So this is a poem I wrote to her. It's called A Woman of Courage, Marion Ewers, 1929 to 2016. You left a hole in the morning of our daily tea and talks about the French elections, or the horde of iguanas overrunning the commons around your condo and swimming in the pool, or the shut-ins you visited with mail and conversation. There are holes now in my memories of your stories, tattered recollections of a childhood that wasn't mine, fishing for tiddlers in the creek in the English countryside, toddling after an imperious great aunt, your military father teaching you to ride horse, deploying armies of toy soldiers across the counterpane, teaching you ancestral pride, teaching you never to cry. Then came the Blitz, the doodlebugs, winged bombs raining from the sky. You gave your bedroom to evacuees, to children from the East End, and slept all winter in the attic, waking to a thin skin of ice on your drinking glass. You were afraid of geese and goats, but not of leaving your island home for strange lands and stranger tongues. You left me boxes of books and records and fragmentary tales you could not forget, but refused to let me record. The Greek War, you volunteered, bandaged the wounded, picked up body parts for burial, put a bullet through the brain of a man who had tortured your comrades. The Algerian War, you hid with the spies, the wives of Algerian laborers tortured and murdered by the police nationale. When the massacre was over, someone you trusted snitched and sent you to jail. New York, you drained your savings for bail, brought cash to the courthouse, but the judge tossed me out without charges. Then at the end, when the tumor began to devour your memories, you swallowed your fear and asked me one last gift. And I brought the seconal and mixed it. A last tear escaped your father's watchful eye as you gulped down the brew and left a hole in the morning. My elder, my mentor, you who advised me on protests and politics and the petty squabbles of marriage. Now I ask another gift from you, wherever you are. You left a hole in my heart. Fill it with your courage. Okay, so I want to turn this over to the panel and then people who want books, I will sign, if you buy books, I will sign them. If anybody wants any of these poetry books, I have a few of those and the same thing. Okay.
Pass, yeah. That's fine. And there's water. So we all get- Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, if he wants us to pass the mic, but we feel better if we can stand there. That's okay too.
I can pass the mic, that's all.
Okay. Well,
Mark, are you okay up there?
no,
Okay.
where we start?
Go ahead.
Oh, we got the mic. Is that okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good. Very good. Okay, I'm really delighted to be here. My name is Perry Brass. I am the president of the Gay Liberation Front Foundation. All the people here on this panel are members of the board of the foundation. The foundation was started in, the foundation was conceived in 2019 when Mark Siegel and I talked about that we should do some sort of organization, at first thinking that would help former members of the Gay Liberation Front who are in really distressed situations. They were indigent at this point, and I wanted to do something for them. Then later, we realized that this was going to be a much bigger project, that this was going to be a project to preserve the amazing legacy of this organization, and also to correct some of the terrible mistruths and lies said about the Gay Liberation Front. And my favorite three of them are, number one, the Gay Liberation Front only lasted for 6 months. I was in it for basically 3 years. I described it as being a graduate course in politics and human relationships. It changed my life. It changed the lives of almost every person who'd been in it. The second one was that the GLF was so contentious and everyone just hated each other. No, that was not true. Some of the deepest relationships in my life were in GLF, and I think most of the people here will say that they formed some of the deepest relationships of their lives in GLF. It was contentious, but it was a radical organization. A radical organization meaning we really wanted to change the government of the United States and change the way the world worked. It was that radical. It was not like, we weren't the DAR. And all radical organizations did go through these kind of contentions and problems. And actually, GLF was not nearly as, well, it wasn't violent the way that other radical organizations that period really were. And the third thing was that GLF did nothing. Boy, was that crap. We did change the world. The entire modern gay movement came out of the work of GLF and the groups that GLF gave birth to. So I'm delighted to be here and talking about the foundation. let me just go over the people here and what they do in the foundation. We have John Knable over here. He's a member at large. We have Flavia Rondo. She's also a member at large. Oh, but also Mark is working on special projects involved with the history of GLF. And so John is, and so is Flavia. Martha Shelley is our treasurer. Mark Siegel is our vice president, and Mark Horn is our web manager. If you want to learn more about GLF, a good way to do it is to pick up the Come Out Reader. Come Out was the newspaper of the Gay Liberation Front. It's an amazing document of this period. I mean, this period from 1969 to 1973. It was a period of violent confrontations with the police. I mean, we're talking about blood on the streets, of communal living, of love situations, which, you know, now in our era of Grindr, we can't even imagine. Just amazing change and amazing hope. So you can get this through Blurb. The print version is revoltingly expensive, but there's also a digital version, which is a lot cheaper. But I will say that even though the print version is expensive, it's really well worth it just to have this, like I said, this amazing document. Oh, yeah. Also, I'd like to have Mark Horn talk about our website. He's our web manager, how you can get to the website and what's on it.
Hi, I'm Mark Horn. I was also a member of the Gay Liberation Front when I was 17 years old. I had gone to an anti-war demonstration and turned around, and behind me there was this guy with a banner that said Gay Liberation Front Gay Youth. And I said, where have you been all my life? And from that moment on, I was going to GLF and gay youth meetings. And I'm not going to talk a lot about my experience there, because what I want to do is tell you about the GLF Foundation website. And the URL for it is glf-foundation.org. Because it hasn't been indexed by Google yet. If you try and look it up online, it won't come up. So just go to glf-foundation.org. This is a website which really labors to give you the history of our organization in ways that aren't told in many of the history books. You'll hear, or you'll be able to read a first-person account of what it was like in Stonewall the night of the raid, since Mark Siegel was there. You'll be able to read a first-person account of the disruption of a conference of the National Organization of Women by Martha. You'll actually have a 3-year timeline of all of the demonstrations and actions we took that have been gathered by John. And all of us have contributed in one way or another. There's a blog where you'll find, for example, I've written for the blog an account of the time that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Ray Rivera came to a gay youth meeting. When after Mark left, I was the chair of gay youth and was there when they came in to ask for a loan for their organization, STAR. I want to say a little bit about gay youth, because while I was in GLF, most of my energy went to gay youth. It was a truly diverse group of people. This was where, for the first time in my life, I was a lower middle class kid from Brooklyn. I had 2 Black friends. I did not know anybody who was Puerto Rican or of any Latinx background, and I certainly didn't know anybody who identified in different gender categories.
when I came to my first gay youth meeting, everybody was there. This was a United Nations of people of various backgrounds, and there were people who presented themselves and their gender in ways that they could, because we were all kids, really. This was for people 21 and under. No one was working, although some of the people in gay youth were living on the street. And so some of what we did was we looked for housing for people. We had dances because you couldn't go to a bar, you were underage and there was no place. We also were all worried about exploitation. So we really organized ourselves to create the kind of social outlets that we needed. And we worked to counsel each other's on how to deal with parents, how to deal with schools. And we actually were invited to speak in schools around the city. We leafleted colleges, we leafleted high schools, which was not always a safe thing to do. So that's one of the things you can read about on the site. There are resources. One of the things that's not up yet, but all of those issues of Come Out will be on the site and downloadable, as well as manifestos. The woman.
Identified woman.
I'm sorry?
Woman identified woman.
Woman identified woman will be there, is there, in fact. There's an essay called Hey Man, which is as relevant today as it was written in 1970, which was a sort of a discussion basically saying to gay men, hey, you guys are misogynists, and you really need to deal with that. Because gay liberation is really starts with women's liberation, and you need to sort of deal with your internal misogyny before you can even begin to deal with your internal homophobia. This is radical stuff in 1970, and it is still radical for many people today. So you will find all of these core documents, as well as first-person accounts at glf-foundation.org. If you are a former member of GLF, you are invited to contribute to the things that are on the site, since this is a site which is growing. It is also a site which is a clearinghouse. It will give you links to other places where you can find information that this group here has vetted as being accurate, since there have been so many inaccurate and misrepresentations of our history. So that's really all I wanted to say, except thank you all for being here. And I also just want to say thank you all to all these folks who are sitting in front of me, because when I came in to GLF, you know, I was a kid and these folks were all older than me, and they were my heroes. They were out there doing the stuff that I was terrified to do, and they gave me the courage to be who I am and to live the life I have. So I want to thank you folks. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to thank Martha. And here is her book. I'm reading it not for the first time, but for the second time. And I hope you will also have the opportunity to do so. I also want to thank Martha for really changing my life. I was on the 14th Street Crosstown bus, which you all know, in July of 1969. And there was Martha. We knew each other for years from bars and just very high, how are you, that kind of friendship. And Martha said to me, she said, you know, we're forming a new organization, the Gay Liberation Front. Are you interested? And my reply was, my exact words, which I remember to this day, I have been waiting for this all, are you kidding? I've been waiting for this all my life. And it did change my life because not only did we work to change the world, but each one of us gained so much from being in GLF. Really, that's, even though I had been out for almost a decade, really, it was through GLF that I began to have support for a political analysis of what it meant to be out in the midst of homophobia. I was stoned on the streets. Cops picked me up. I mean, I could go on, the everyday violence against gay people and lesbians.
You mean you were not that you were stoned on marijuana, people were stoned.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes, stoned, stones thrown. There was an empty lot next to the house I lived in on Avenue D, what? Attacked every minute. And finally, they destroyed the apartment my lover and I shared, taking even the doors off the hinges. But we had GLF. The house collapsed a couple of years later. That building literally collapsed. But we were saved because we had GLF. And I thank Martha every time I think about GLF, that she had the courage and the knowledge to start, to begin. Because I had tried the DOB, but they'd only been in the city for 1 year. I now live ironically around the corner from the office building in which I met with two women, DOB people, and me. I was 18 or 19, and I was terrified. It was night. It's a building that spans a whole block. And there's this one tiny room, maybe as big as the space where the panel is sitting in. And I was nervous. And they were even more nervous because they thought I was there to entrap them because I was so young. And the word lesbian or any variation on lesbian was never said. I left thinking, who are these women? What are they doing? And then I tried the Mattachine Society, not the world's greatest fit. And then how many people know about the Corduroy Club? Anybody? It was a men's social organization, and they said, oh, yes, we could always use two nice young mascots who could come to our meetings. That's basically what it was. But then there was GLF. And in GLF began really, I can say, really a lifetime of activism. And it has meant everything to me. So thank you, Martha. And read the book, it's great.
John Knable.
Well, what to say after all that? I was a young graduate student at NYU in 1969, and I just moved to New York, and I came out of the closet within about 2 months. I started to meet some other gay men for the first time in my life. And one of them, luckily, was a member of the Gay Liberation Front. He'd been attending meetings. And so in late October, early November of '69, I went to my first GLF meetings. And again, this is an exciting moment. We were in a room and they're all gay and lesbian. My God, I didn't have this in my whole life, and before you know it, you get really involved. So for the first Gay Pride March, I made an experience of being gay bashed the very weekend, the night before the first Gay Pride March. I made newspapers and I marched in the first Pride March with a very large bandage over my stitches in my forehead. Right after that, I joined a Gay Men's Living Collective in GLF. A lot of the organization, at least on the men's side, was those of us who pitched our money together and rented spaces in Manhattan. There were like 5 Gay Men's Collective. There were 5 in my Gay Men's Collective, and we were full-time gay activists. I dropped out of graduate school. I mean, there were so many demonstrations, so many gigs, so much energy that we were just fired up young people.
Became our whole lives.
So, I mean, and you've heard of things like the August 1970 march in Times Square that ended up being a very large
Police car.
village riot. A group of about 200 of us after the marching in Times Square, we were marching in Times Square because young transvestites had come to meetings saying there was a police crackdown on gay people in Times Square. And we were all village people, we really didn't know what the Times Square scene was all about. But they said that people were just being, gay couples were just being arrested off movie lines, and several hundred people over a couple of weekends had been arrested and taken off the streets in Times Square. So about 300 of us gathered on Saturday night at 10 o'clock at night, and we plunged ourselves right into the middle of all those people. And Times Square that at that time was full of porn theaters. It was not the dressy tourist location that it is today. So for about an hour, we marched there. And we were then supposed to end, this is a story, I probably shouldn't be going into such detail, but just as an example of what GLF did. After the march, we said, well, an hour now, we've really kind of completed our demonstration that we had intended, but we want to go and end the demonstration on the 36th Street Police Station and let them know that we were here. And so we went south of 42nd Street, 39th, 38th, there were about 200 of us. And suddenly there were no people around. And we got to the police station and there was a group of about 12 policemen standing there in riot gear, slapping their billy clubs, waiting for us to come up. Well, we said, I was one of the monitors at the very front. We said, we can't leave this march into this obvious violence that we would be subjected to. So we said, to the village. And the whole group just kind of like, okay, that's a good idea. So from the 30s, we walked all the way down to the village. And what do you know when we found the police were having a police raid at a gay bar? Well, the place exploded. People came out of the bars, they came out of their houses, and we had a tremendous riot that
The complete confrontation.
cars it ended up going down to 8th Street, where the store windows were crashed and the cars were were burned. It was really what we call the forgotten August 1975.
What war was it?
Everybody thinks about Stonewall, but
What war was it?
the bar, it was
Was it the Haven?
the Haven.
Yeah.
The Haven. So this was the kind of life experience that we were having in those days. We felt we were making progress. We felt, ourselves were we were being ourselves and being in the streets where we needed to be.
I think that's a really interesting kind of snapshot of what life was like during this period of our lives, of our young lives, in this amazing organization. I think now would be a good time if you have any questions you'd like to ask us or any comments, we'd love to hear them.
I have a comment.
Okay.
First, go ahead.
So, as Mark did so well, told you about Gay Youth and how we organized and why we organized. I like to think of us from Gay Youth as being the first out generation. And many of us look upon Gay Youth as a group of friends who have remained friends for over 50 years. There are, I believe, 6 of us still in communication constantly, and we show up at events on a regular basis. When I go around to speak, people often ask me, oh, what college did you graduate? And I usually say Gay Liberation Front. This basically taught me everything I knew how to do in life. I left my home in 1969, which was Philadelphia, thinking that I was the only gay person in a city of 1.6 million. So I came to New York to find my community. And I think this is a very pivotal point in our history, because when I did that, the same time I was doing that, there was one march a year, every year, July 4th, in front of Independence Hall. I didn't know about that. I lived in Philadelphia. And I think 1 month later, or 6 weeks later for me, in New York, Stonewall Riot. From Stonewall Riot, from the ashes of that, through this organization, we all felt we were not going to be alone. And we understood why we felt alone, because as long as we were invisible, society could label anything they wished upon us. So the first thing that this group of people did, this brave group of people did, was to say, we accept self-identity. Whatever your identity is, we accept that. We accept you as who you are. We decided that we would create community. Within that first year, we did legal alerts, medical alerts, formed the first gay youth group, formed the first trans organization, demonstrated against the media, demonstrated against the police, did the first gay publication that was about a gay organization and what it was doing, fought against the Village Voice, if all of that was not enough, and many more things.
It gave birth to many other organizations.
And gave birth to many organizations. All of that were not enough. At the end of that first year, we helped create Christopher Street Liberation Day Committee, which created the first Pride. That is Gay Liberation Front.
I forgot to mention one other person when I was talking about about the Gay Liberation Front Foundation Board, and that is the wonderful Ellen Brody, who cannot be with us here today. Ellen is our secretary, and she is really the only way to put it, she is the mother of gay pride. The Christopher Street Liberation Day March came from an idea that she and Craig Rodwell, the owner of Oscar Wilde Bookstore, had. And Ellen decided to bring it, after they had this idea, to a conference called ECHO, East Coast East Coast Homophile Organizations, right? To bring it to the ECHO conference. And at the ECHO conference, all of these other like old school homophile groups said, yes, it is now time to do it. The most amazing thing was within a year, basically ECHO did not exist, but Christopher Street Liberation Day March did, and it continued once a year, forever, and I hope it will. So I really wanted to talk about and give some recognition to Ellen. We're really sorry she can't be here. She lives in Santa Barbara now.
Her first person story of this event and bringing it to ECHO is on the GLF-Foundation site, if you want to read it.
Any questions?
I wanted to say something before we open this thing up. And I'm quoting a little phrase from Harry here. We were a raggedy-ass bunch of kids. We had no money. We had no political connections in high places, but we changed the world. And it wasn't just us. We started something, we ignited the fire, and then thousands and eventually millions of people joined in and formed their own organizations all over the country and around the world. And what that means is to you is every one of you has the ability, whatever you do, you have certain gifts. I have a big mouth. I can make speeches. I was not a good treasurer. I'm still trying. But every one of you can contribute something, and it takes all of us. And if this book does anything, maybe it's my memoir of personal history, but I encourage you all to study all of the histories and give what you can every day. Think of what you can do to make a better world, to do something to make a better world for now and for the generations that come. That's it.
I think someone in the back has,
Yes, he does.
okay,
So, I'm aware that, there were certainly discussions in the broader community as early as 1965 about finding a way to create a national movement. So what was the difference between post-Stonewall and earlier than that, which is certainly the desire existed? So, I mean, what made the difference?
there's a simple answer to that. At least I have that answer. And that's what GLF did, which was, I think, our amazing accomplishment, was that we took all of the advances that feminism and the women's movement had made, the actions that civil rights movement had made, and the peace movement had made, and we used these in a gay, or what we now call LGBT direction. This gave us the theoretical foundation to cast off so much. I mean, to just say, you know, as Martha said, to just say, fuck you to so many people who were going to destroy us, to psychiatry, to the law, to the church, to the cops. We had this theoretical foundation and it became part of our heart. And that was the difference. And we gave mission to other people to use this foundation to say, I no longer have to think this way. I don't have to be destroyed by my own internalized homophobia and society's homophobia. And we use that. And it's amazing how quickly that fire spread. You want to speak?
Fabio wants to say something.
Yeah, I think that the homophile movements tried very hard to prove that queer people were just like everybody else with this little small difference. But we said our difference teaches us about the world and allows us to live our lives and to understand the structures that oppress each and every one of us that we have to live under. So really, we said it's our difference that makes us who, yes, nobody said that allows us to go forward. We're not going to hide our difference. We're going to use it to illuminate how every person who is listening, you know, within earshot of us, is oppressed in different ways by the same structures.
Also, the important thing is we made alliances with other groups. We didn't just stick to one issue and shun the other groups because, oh, we didn't want to be labeled communist, or we didn't want to be labeled this, that, and the other thing. We sought them out, the Panthers, the National Organization for Women, the Socialists, anybody. We made alliances with all the progressive groups, and that's what changed America.
Mark, you want to say something?
Yeah. I keep trying to do this in a lens, which is I'm very conflicted about. Coming from Philadelphia, which I think is the best city in America, which had those very early marches, I find it kind of interesting that those marches didn't reflect me in any way, shape, or form. Well, I had to come to New York to find Gay Liberation Front, to find something that reflected me. And those marches, which is that homophile movement from 1965, and by the way, before, all the way back to the 50s, if you take a look at Mattachine, to the 20s, if you go back to Henry Gerber in Chicago, and even further, if you want to go back to Magnus Hirschfeld in Berlin. All of those organizations in the history of our community did one thing. They wished to assimilate. We did not wish to assimilate. We wish to proudly and boldly be visible of who we were.
Celebrate.
Celebrate.
Yeah.
And that's the difference of who we were. And our community listened to that voice. And from those 40 to 100 people that marched every year in Philadelphia in suits and ties and dresses, 1 year later, after the organization of this organization, we now had 15,000 people on the street. thanks to Ellen, who created that word, to that committee along with Craig. Which I think is one of the most important things we here in this community, specifically in New York, you should take ownership of that. The fact that Pride is probably the most important export that the LGBT community of this country has given the world. We have gone from less than 100 in Philadelphia to 15,000 in New York, to 100,000 in one city, to 1 million in Sydney, to 3 million in Sao Paulo, to 1 million in London. We have gone from a small, as you call it, ragtag group to millions. Why? We are out loud and proud.
Okay, we need to let more people.
Yes.
talk.
Okay. Michaela, do you want to say?
I just wanted to say that I'm so proud that I was also a member, but I want to talk about one thing that I will probably write about here, the women, the bravery of the women, and my favorite Martha's story. As you all know, in 1969, the Mafia ran all the bars, including the women's bars. We were their cash cow. Well, the women of the Gay Liberation Front decided that we were going to close the women's mafia bars. And so, because Flavia and I were Italian, it was decided that we were going to stand outside with leaflets to get the women to come to the GLF women's dances. Because when the mob would come up, we go, "Don't toccare, io sono sangue, don't touch me, I'm blood." And so. Beatles daughter, they don't know. So. And here comes my favorite part of the story. We got all these women, the Saturday night, those bars were empty after a while. They're all coming to our dance at alternate use down in the street for cookies.
Right.
So I'm standing there, you know, with the cash, we had to turn like $2, and it was a long flight of stairs to get up to the, where we were having our dance. About 200 women dancing, having a great time. The door opens, I see the guns. That's the first thing I see. I see the men with the guns coming up the stairs. And so I took the cash box and the sign, I slammed it shut, I handed it to Don, I got shotgun, I said, run down the back stairs as fast as you can. And, you know, so they come up and I go, can I help you, gentlemen? And they're like, you know, we want the money, they're all, I think they're gonna scare the hell out of me. So I'm like, I'm sorry, we don't charge any money, you're welcome to stay, whatever. And they got so angry, they put the gun in my head and they go, if you don't stop this, we're gonna kill you. And I said, well, you may as well shoot me right here because you're not gonna stop. Then they think they're gonna scare Martha. This was their biggest mistake. They go over to Martha and they go, you know who we are? And Martha, who's the cucumber? She goes, no, and I don't care. Do you know who we are? We're the Gay Liberation Front, and we're gonna shut you down.
Yes.
We had ended the mafia bars.
Andy?
Well, so, you know, I'm interested in how GLF formally ended because there were so many myths about that. Obviously, it didn't end. What's going on? You're still activists. You've spawned all this activism all over the world. But what is your recollection of why it stopped formally meeting and what happened?
Well, I mean, I think we all have a different thing to say about that, but I can say several things. One of them was there were different waves of GLF. Like the first year was one wave, the second year was another wave. I stayed with the organization until like basically for 3 years. Some of it came from simple splintering. We gave birth to so many groups, and then the groups became autonomous groups, and the main group just got smaller and smaller until finally people weren't coming to Sunday night meetings. They were not coordinating. Other people have different ideas about that. Do you want to talk about this? Anyone else? About why you think GLF ended?
It never ended. That's what I think.
I don't know why it ended, but I do know that from my own experience, I started getting involved with other things that took more precedence. I got invited to, I was writing for Come Out newspaper and also typesetting it at night and selling it on the streets. Then I got invited to join Rat newspaper when women took it over and got involved with that. And then I got invited in 1972 to produce the first lesbian radio program in the world at WBAI Radio. And that became a 20-hour-a-week job. That was my part-time job. My other job was, you know, paying the bills on my little slum apartment. But from 1972 to 1974, my passion was that radio show.
I just want to say, I agree with what Flavia said about how it did not end. I mean, a good example of that was that with two friends of mine who were also involved with GLF, we started the Gay Men's Health Project Clinic, which later finally morphed into Cal and Lord. This could not have happened without the Gay Liberation Front. And there are other examples of this where that energy, that radicalism, that idea that you were going to start doing things on your own without getting permission from the, you know, from the authorities, from the establishment, that really went on.
Yes, I also want to acknowledge Radical Lesbians, which came out of,
Yes, very much.
thank you. Radical Lesbians began to develop not only a political stance, a feminist political stance, but also allowed for the lesbians and radical lesbians to begin to look at the way women were depicted in the greater culture and the way in which women were excluded from creating culture, and gave a place for poets. Bran Winans from GLF, it did the audience. With Violet Press, the first anthology of lesbian poets in the universe, you might say. We had art shows. And I could go on and on. We wrote about our experience. We were able to see our experience clearly, or to work to see it clearly. One never simply experience clearly, but to work to see it clearly without this kind of very habitual dominating scrim of what men, including gay men, thought about us. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge the many, many institutions that radical lesbians set up. Everything from publishing houses to a food co-op that lasted for years and years.
I think Mark wants to say something.
Yeah. The spirit of GLF never left any of us. As Martha said, she moved out of New York and went on to other things, as I did. I left here in 1971. But what I learned in GLF, that spirit didn't change. For me, what it meant, what I learned, most important thing that we could do as a community to change society, because they had to change, not us, was be more visible. And I didn't think we were going quick enough or fast enough. So I decided, in the true Gay Liberation Front spirit, to create a campaign against networks. So I started disrupting live TV shows. CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, the Today Show with Barbara Walters, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and that got attention and eventually led to the foundation of GLAAD. Aside from that, I also got involved with working with government, which is sort of surprising to some of us. And so therefore that led into the fact with some of the first state non-discrimination law in the country. It also created the first LGBT statewide commission in the country and the first LGBT liaisons today. Now think of it. Every single governmental LGBT commission today, every single LGBT liaison today, even those appointed by President Biden, go back to that, come back to this.
Exactly.
I do want to say that gay youth never went away. It became lesbian and gay youth, then bi and lesbian and gay youth, then bi glitney, because, and then it was eventually in the early 2000s absorbed by the center and became youth enrichment services. which many people from the history of the organization weren't happy about, because for the very first time, it was being run by adults. And as you know, to sort of steal a phrase, youth was doing it for themselves. And while many things that we can get in terms of social services, or that young people can get in social services from the center, it's always good to have a space that is by youth for youth. I do want to mention other organizations like Identity House, some of whose founders, and that still exists today. Some of those founders came out of GLF. It may be a little sort of strange to say it, but of course we all know that GAA came out of GLF, which means that you know, all of the organizations that came out of that basically came out of us. So really, you know, if you were to do a
Flow chart.
or an ancestry,
Tell them what GAA stands for.
the Gay Activists Alliance. For those of you who may not know that organization, which is also a shame because they were a great organization. You know, this was sort of the center, and you can sort of think of us as the Big Bang of queer liberation, because after that, all the stars went in all those different directions. And when Mark was talking about the media, you know, GLF did a demonstration in front of Time Life. And one of the things that really inspired, and that's why all these organizations happened all around the country, is all of a sudden the media was paying attention to us and sort of sharing our voice, because we were being in their face about it. And that really made a difference.
I think we're gonna get the last one. One more?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm Shep. There's not a question, it's a comment. I know you've heard it before, but I'm very moved by this. And I just want to thank all you guys for your bravery all those years ago that paved the way for me to enjoy my happy gay life. And you didn't think about it, but you were changing the lives of people yet unborn. Millions of people owe you a debt. They may not even know it, but you have changed their lives. I know your lives were changed by being GLF. Most of us weren't in it, but you changed our lives, so thank you.
Okay, I want to say a couple last things. One, business matter. I'll be signing books of people who want to buy them. But then on the matter of where we go from here. What we did not succeed in changing was the economic system, which, as you all know, has gotten worse and worse for the average person. 3 individuals in this country, 3 individuals own as much wealth as half the rest of the population. That's got to change. We got climate change as the biggest problem of all, because if we don't tackle that, if the next generation and we don't work together to tackle that, our lives will not exist anymore. And the gay rights, women's rights, blacks' rights, none of that will make a damn bit of difference, because we'll be dead. So we've got to keep going. And one of the things I say, I think, in the introduction to the book, the struggle doesn't end. I quote from the Passover Seder: in every generation, a new Pharaoh arises to oppress us. In every generation, what that means is we have to fight back. And I'm hoping that everything we say here, that my book, that all the other books that have been published, just feed that fire, and that you all, you younger people particularly, take it from there. We couldn't write the script for the older generation, couldn't write the script for us, what we should do. We can't write the script for you. We can just support you in making those changes and do what we can to help. Thank you.
Great, thank you all so much. Thank you, especially Martha. As Martha said, there are books at the front and you should buy them.
And read them.
This is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.